part of our job is to see what God is already doing. And that's really what we felt like this is. God was already connecting with people who were spiritual but not religious. And God was already doing that in part through sustainable farming and creation care. And so we were just having our eyes opened to that work that was being done. I had been a pastor for 20 years, and I had been in Columbus serving for 8 years, so I was familiar with urban, but I didn't know anything about farming.
What happens when God puts a vision in your heart and mind? For Ryan Grace and the people of Maize, Manor United Methodist Church, you start a farm in the city, on the church lawn. Knowing the farm will reach people who may never cross the doorstep of your existing church building. This is a great story. You won't want to miss it. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Kay.
Thank you for being with us today. So we're going to get right to it. So you're a pastor's kid who grew up to be a pastor. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I grew up, my father was a pastor, became one when I was 3, so he's been a pastor for as long as I remember. I grew up greatly respecting the work of the pastor and the work in the local church, but I had no desire to do it. So it wasn't until towards the end of college that I found myself sitting in a worship service, listening to a pastor speak down at the school, the campus where I went to college. And that day, I found myself for the first time wondering what it would be like if I was a pastor. And that kind of then led to going to seminary and getting kind of affirmation of that call. But it wasn't something that I grew up planning to be or wanting to be. It's something that I came to, towards the end of my college career.
And now you and your wife, Mary Ellen, do documentaries that are really related in many ways to our social principles.
Yeah, that's what it eventually turned into. Once I graduated from seminary, got involved with the conference in taking basically one social principle each year and making a documentary that would explore it. So, and then we also started creating Bible studies to go along with it. So we'd look at it through the Wesleyan quadrilateral, scripture, tradition, experience, reason, and share stories about things that were going on in our world with that. And that's actually how I met my wife. We met on a mission trip with the West Ohio Conference, going to Russia to film some of our partnership ministries there. She has a background in journalism, so she was going to write stories and I was going to film.
So tell us just real quick about a couple of your documentaries and how they relate back to the social principles.
Sure. So we've done documentaries on immigration. So went down to the border and filmed some of the circumstances that led to the situation on the border wall. This has been about 15 years ago, although some of it's still, relevant today. And then looked at the social principles on that and looked at the scripture teachings around hospitality, caring for refugees and strangers, and, explored those pieces. We also did one on homelessness. So we looked at some of the root causes of homelessness and, how to get past some of the stigma to that. Also in terms of looking at poverty from a social principles perspective and a biblical perspective of caring for neighbors. And right now we're working on a series of documentaries that are about climate change and building local resilience to the global crisis of climate change.
So some people don't believe that climate change is real. What are some of the things that you've seen or that you've researched that indicate otherwise?
I think we all see it now. 20 years ago, it was fairly common for people to deny that climate change existed at all. But over the course of the last 20 years, we've all started to see this rise in extreme weather events, whether it's floods or hurricanes or wildfires or droughts, rising sea levels. The impacts and effects of climate change are essentially undeniable now.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that there are people who are completely overwhelmed. And so I think for people who are over, let's say, 40, they look at it and go, well, it's too late now, or what can I do now? I can't stop that, so I'm not going to do anything. What would you say to those people, or to inspire somebody else to do something?
Yeah. I think it's a great question, and it really became one of the pivotal questions for our approach in making the films that we started to make. we decided that we didn't want to concentrate just on the doom and gloom and the bad things that were going on in the world, because that is overwhelming. You feel like you can't make a difference. So instead, from the very beginning, we started seeking out stories of people who were already practicing local sustainable ways of life. And that gives you something to work towards. So we met with people in Southeast Ohio who were preserving the old growth forest that still exist. And we met with people who were, creating solar energy business to be able to, what they said was, accelerate the shift to renewable energy. Said the shift is happening anyway. We're working to accelerate it. And we visited a lot of small farms and met people who were doing, agriculture in a sustainable way locally. And each of those things were designed on purpose to celebrate things that individual people can do.
Would you say that one of the ways that you're doing that now is through what we're calling the urban farm church?
Yes. Yeah, the urban farm church is definitely an outgrowth of all of these things. It came from visiting these other small sustainable farms and seeing the work that people were doing. It was in part as a response to climate change, but we were also just blown away by the community that formed around these small farms. They were a way to feed their neighbors. They were a way to build relationships with people. And for the farmers that we met, there was this deep spiritual connection to the land. And I think we've lost that in some ways in our culture, this sense of a deep spiritual connection to the land. But, this is the earth that God made, and we're here to take care of it. And if we take care of it, it'll take care of us. And if we don't, it can't. So the people who we were meeting had this very deep spiritual connection to the earth, but they were not church people. In fact, they were very much not church people. They were people who were very opposed to going into formal religious institutions on Sunday mornings. They're the kind of people who you'd have to knock out and drag them in by their hair if you wanted to get them into a sanctuary. But to them, their sanctuary was outside. It was in nature. And we saw this in the conversations and interviews we did with them, and that made me start to wonder if sustainable farming and creation care could actually be a new way to reach new people for the church. And that's what led to the development of the Urban Farm Church.
Now, how can you be a pastor of Maize Manor United Methodist Church and the Urban Farm Church at the same time? And what is the relationship, if there is any, between the people who attend Maize and the people who participate in the Urban Farm Church?
So I've been the pastor with Maize Manor for a little over 8 years, and met the people, worked with them, developed ministries, got to know everybody, built relationships. We navigated various challenges and crises internally and externally, including the pandemic. And so when the vision for the Urban Farm Church crystallized one day, when I was actually visiting a small sustainable farm in central Ohio, looking at how much they could grow on 2.5 acres of land. And while I was looking out at it, I had this vision of the idea that we could do that at Maize Manor because they sit on 4.5 acres inside the city of Columbus. So I went back and started talking to people in the church about it, and I figured they'd kind of laugh me out of the building and tell me no, but they didn't. So everybody kept saying yes, and allowed me to do it. It is tricky to navigate the relationship between Maize Manor and the Urban Farm Church because I was at Maize Manor first. But in one sense, it's really not that uncommon of a situation for a person to be a pastor of more than one community of faith. I did it when I was in seminary. I served a small 2-point charge in rural Southeast Ohio when I was there. And there are many pastors who do it in various ways. So the relationship between Maize Manor and the Urban Farm Church is that Maize Manor is helping to birth the Urban Farm Church and allowing us to use this land that they have. And when you go to a church that's existed for 60 years and ask them to let you build a farm in their front yard, it's a big thing for them to say yes. And we didn't know if we would get that or not, but they've been game to allow that to go on. And then Maize Manor also treats it as an outreach project for them. So we have people from Maize Manor who volunteer. on the farm. And it's not everybody, but the people who want to, that creates a new outlet, a new spiritual discipline that they can be involved in. So we have some people who give to it to support it financially. We have some people who volunteer on it. And we have the whole church that's kind of agreed, to let us do this sort of crazy work in the middle of Columbus of building a farm. Right now, the front yard is filled with mounds of compost and mulch while we're building the beds and getting that stuff ready. But they've been game and they've been excited to do it. And so we had really minimal resistance to it when it was all said and done.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, if instead of a manicured lawn with beautiful flowers, that type of thing, you ripped up the grass and you planted crops, or you're in the process of planting crops in the middle of the city of Columbus.
Right. So we didn't rip up the grass. And that's so part of what the Urban Farm Church is doing is we want to model some of the best cutting edge practices for creation care and what we're doing. And right now, one of the ways that that's done is through what's called no-till farming, no-dig beds. And so what we actually did was we put giant black tarps over the half acre that we're planting on for several months. And that was a big ask and change. It took time for people to get used to that for Maize Manor. But so we put that out as a way to kill the grass and start to return those nutrients to the soil. And then the no-dig farming beds that we're creating, the way you do that is you actually put a layer of cardboard down to continue to tamp out weeds and kill the grass. And then you put 6 inches of compost on top of it. And you actually plant directly into the compost itself. And then the roots from the plants will break through the cardboard into the ground beneath. Then the cardboard will eventually just return to the soil. So it's actually considered one of the most sustainable ways to do it because you're not disturbing the soil beneath the grass in the same way as you do when you till. When you till it up, you're killing all of the connections between the fungus and, the soil and all of the, things that live down there. So this way you keep that stuff intact and it's actually considered lower impact and better for the environment. But yeah, we are building these beds over half an acre in the front yard that's right on the road facing Maize Manor. And that was a conversation we had too. People were like, well, could we just hide it in the back? And I said, no, we want people to see it. So the idea is to model and to do it. So yeah, we're actually building a farm in the middle of Columbus.
So then how is, you keep referring to it as a farm. Some people would think, well, isn't that just a community garden?
Yeah, so typically when people think of community gardens, they think of it in terms of a project where people will come and work a specific part of it, that they grow food for themselves, take home. Like a lot of times it's broken up into sections, and you'll have one family will do one section, one family will do another. And so everybody's responsible for coming and taking care of their own, and then they take the food back when they do it. What we're concentrating on is the communal aspect of the farming. So we're treating it all as one big field that we are putting out crops, in rows for what will grow in that field. And we took a poll from people in the community to see what they were most interested in learning how to grow. But we ultimately made the determination for what it would be. And then we are creating community farming days where people come out to work the land together. So we'll allow some people to come out and work it on their own once we get to know them, if it doesn't suit their schedule for the times that we offer. But for the most part, we're concentrating on getting people together, working side by side, talking to each other, getting to hear each other's stories, putting in the labor and the sweat equity, and growing the food together. And then the food will actually then be given back to the community for free. So we say we're growing the food with the community for the community. And that's part of what makes it more of a communal farm enterprise than a community garden.
So I'm just curious as to what crops you're planting.
The number one crop that people voted for was peppers. So we're going to be doing all manner and variety of peppers. And then the second thing was sweet corn. So we're going to put some sweet corn in. We're going to keep it backed off the road so that it's not affecting visibility, but we're going to put in sweet corn. And then the third crop was tomatoes. So those are the 3 biggest ones. But then there's a whole range of other things that we're going to plant, pieces of as well. And some of that is mint, some of it's lettuce, cabbage, onions, various things things that go along. Part of what we want to do is raise the things that are necessary to can our own salsa and then be able to sell that too, just as a fundraiser to put back some, into the farm itself. And then we're developing a berry patch and a native pollinator wildflower section to it as well.
And that's to help with bees.
And that's to help with bees. And that's actually the native pollinator section. The wildflowers are not going to be inside the farm itself. They'll be outside in another section of the yard, but that's to help with the bees in the city and bring those back. But we're not going to put it inside the fence because we don't mind if the deer eat that.
This is really fascinating to me. Can you tell me, in the midst of all of this, where do you see God?
Yeah, we see God everywhere. When we started this enterprise, we had this idea for the urban farm church and this vision that was resting on my heart. But for me, I had been a pastor for 20 years, so I was familiar with the church, and I had been in Columbus serving for 8 years, so I was familiar with urban. But I didn't know anything about farming. So I had this whole series of fears that came to my mind when we first started the work. The first fear I had was that we wouldn't be able to get enough money. We do not have the backing of a congregation that's flush with cash. Usually with a ministry this size and scope, there's some church that is fronting a lot of the upfront cash and work for that to be done. And we don't have that kind of financial backing. So money was a huge concern for where would we come up with $100,000 to build the farm and, get this work started. The second fear that I had was that we'd be able to get the money, but we wouldn't be able to get the people. Maize Manor is a small church. And so this was a project that was too big for them to take on their own from a volunteer basis. So it was really about working with the community, and people from Maize Manor who volunteer are supplemental to the work that's being done. So I was afraid we wouldn't be able to get enough people to do it. My third fear was if we got the money and we got the people, we still wouldn't be able to grow crops because I don't know anything about farming. So I was afraid that we would fail to be able to grow crops that would be successful. And my fourth fear was we'd have the money and the people and we'd grow crops, but we wouldn't be able to build spiritual relationships to help to nurture people's faith and to help them to grow in their relationship with God. So those were the four fears. Outside of those four things, I was completely confident the whole thing would work and there wasn't anything to be worried about as long as those four things came together. So those were the four fears that I had. And what we've seen over the year and a half that we've been working on this is that we've watched God take care of those, one thing at a time. One thing at a time. Starting with zero money, we're now 95% funded for 2023, and it's March. So, we're confident we'll be able to bring in the rest of the money over the course of the year. And that's been from a combination of conference, district, secular places that support the farming itself, and also individual donors who give. So the money has come as we've needed it. As far as people are concerned, we've been just blown away by the response we've gotten from people going around the community and inviting them to get involved and talking to them about the project. We recently had our farm build day, and we had 55 different volunteers on site over the course of the day. And then for growing crops, this was a huge stress for me. I don't think I even understood how stressed out I was about that until we got a solution for it. And it turned out that one of the things that we did from the very beginning was we started to build partnerships with people who did know how to do farming. So we were working with community garden people, we were working with master gardeners, we were working with sustainable farms in central Ohio and even beyond. We started working with OSU Extension and Agriculture. So we're pulling on the expertise and getting to know people who do this work. And while we were doing that, last fall, one of the farmers that we had been consulting with from a different sustainable urban farm was getting ready to be in transition and to move away from the place where he had been. And he was interested in moving into North Linden in Columbus. He knew some people there. So he came to us and asked if we were be interested in bringing him on as our farm and education developer. And he had 7 years of experience in urban farming in central Ohio. And we said yes. So we brought him on. And then, we immediately felt like like our chances of success in growing crops, went up exponentially with that. And it all kind of pieced together and came together with that, with so many things that were beyond our control.
So you hired a farmer.
We hired a farmer, yeah. And that was our first hire. For most new church starts, the first hire is probably a worship leader. For us, our first hire was a farmer to bring in so that we could build the farm, because the farm is the centerpiece, through which we're then developing the relationships with everyone around it.
When you mentioned that you had 50 volunteers that came to the farm day, I noticed in some of the pictures that you had that the age range was pretty significant. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, we've been really thrilled. Our target demographic was hedged towards people who were Generation X and millennials, which are the generations that are getting away from the church. And that really is the primary demographic that we've been reaching people in. We have some people who are, beyond that. And we have a really great diversity of ages. We had kids as young as 3 who were out on the farm, walking around with their tools, following their parents around while they were working. And we had people up into their 70s who were out pushing wheelbarrows and getting stuff done. So we had a full range of age levels, and also had great participation from people who were, different races. And we even have some different faiths who come out, some people who are Buddhist and Muslim and, different things who come and help, and Jewish. And we all work together, and we can all agree that this is one planet that we all share. So we take the approach of in all things charity, as John Wesley said.
Some people would say that, well, sure, it's easy when you're not necessarily trying to grow a church, you're growing a farm. What would you say in response to that?
I'd say not very many things about this have been easy. So for the approach for us is we say that the Urban Farm Church is an urban church with a sustainable farm where we grow crops and community in the north side of Columbus. And the emphasis really is twofold with that. Part of it is building the farm and succeeding at growing the crops to feed the community. And that's been a whole new enterprise. It's unlike anything I've ever done before, and they didn't teach a class on it in seminary. And the other side to it is growing the community and the spiritual relationships with the people. And one of the things that we talk about at Maize Manor is how the church is not a building, the church is the people. And the Urban Farm Church is really built on that idea. The idea is that you don't have to build a new building somewhere to create a new faith community. We can create a new kind of faith community right where we are and share that space with Maize Manor, who is already there.
So, Ryan, I'm curious, do you have a scripture that speaks to you at this time in your ministry?
Yeah, the scripture that's been kind of our guiding light through this work has been from Isaiah chapter 43, verse 19, where God says, I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And that verse has stood out to us and has been something that we've reflected on at various times through the project. I think in part because this is a new thing. This is unlike anything I've ever done before. I've been in ministry for 20 years, so I'm kind of an old dog to be learning new tricks. So it's been neat to be reminded that God's always doing new things. I like that it asks, do you not perceive what God is doing? Because it gives this indication that part of our job is to see what God is already doing. And that's really what we felt like this is. God was already connecting with people who were spiritual but not religious. And God was already doing that in part through sustainable farming and creation care. And so we were just having our eyes opened to that work that was being done. And then the verse where it talks about making a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert has been big for us as well, because I feel like this is a wilderness time for the church. Nothing seems to work the way it used to in the good old days for most classic churches. And that leaves us kind of wandering around, not sure what to do. So the idea that God will be with us in that wilderness time and will remove the obstacles and put water in the desert and take care of those things, I think is a beautiful, powerful thing. And we've certainly seen that happen.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us that I've not asked you about, or something you want to make sure that people, if they don't remember anything else about this podcast?
Oh my gosh.
No pressure.
When this vision came and crystallized in my mind, it created a way to get back to work in the ministry. and to try to reach new people in new ways. And it's made it possible to re-engage with all of the levels of the work, with Maize Manor and the Classic Church, as well as with the community itself. And it's been a real blessing to see the ways that God has been at work in all of that. So I think the last thing I would say to people is, to not be afraid to look for the new things that God is doing. And when you see something that God is doing, to trust that if you step out and do it and take the risk and get to work on it, that God will have ways to sort that out for you, because we're at a time when I think the church just has to get used to taking a higher level of risk than what we're used to, because it's a new day and it's a new age. And if we're going to reach these new generations and create ways for them to grow spiritually, we're going to have to find new ways to do that. So I would encourage people to not be afraid to step out and do something crazy like, building an urban farm inside the capital city of Columbus, and to try to connect with the demographics that are farthest removed as they can be from Classic Church, because it can be done if God chooses to bless you and to lead you in doing.
Well, we are grateful, Ryan, for you and for your family and for the people at Maize Manor who are trying to find new and exciting ways to do ministry. Good luck to you and the Urban Farm Church. We can't wait to see how your crops turn out. Thank you for listening to Times Like These. Episodes are available wherever you listen to podcasts. If this episode has touched and inspired you, please share it with a friend. If you know of someone we should feature on this program, please let us know by emailing us at wocmedia@wocumc.org. We'll see you next time.